Returning to that sad little man and his forthcoming testimony on the Hill today, talking about Tony Fauci. And I'm appreciative of Rand Paul for obtaining this documentation and for Tony Fauci's arrogance actually aiding our efforts here for a reckoning, inadvertently, of course. His arrogance did so much destruction, but at least it's also sowed the seeds of his own reputational destruction. It would seem, one would hope. And by the way, I see some on the left suggesting, how did they get his private diaries expressing outrage like there was some invasion of Tony Fauci's sacrosanct privacy? This was all done on government computers. This is a professional work product that was obtained by Rand Paul. And is the timing of it, the release of it, less than coincidental? Yes, it is less than coincidental. It should have been released right before his testimony so it can frame everything that is discussed yesterday and focus people's attention on the reckoning that is so richly owed this guy and many others. But he rides point because he was the face of it and enjoyed every minute of it, despite being wrong on and hypocritical and dishonest and treacherous about on issue after issue after issue we've poured over for 5 years, and we're doing it again. The mitigations, social distancing, mask wearing, the efficacy of the vax, the incidence of vaccine and injuries, lockdowns and mandates, all of it, gain of function research, COVID origins, not an honest account of any of it from this guy. In fact, almost a consistently dishonest account, purposely so. And why not? Because he was so busy, too busy, having amazing days, as he well documented, being feted by the likes of Julia Roberts.
So rad that we have maybe the coolest man on the planet right now. Wow, and there's the room. This is intense. Does anybody else have
Hello. Hi there.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, this is such a thrill. How are you?
Pretty good, I guess. You know, it's a little bit like running on fumes for a couple of months, but
I would imagine this is a thrill for me because you truly have emerged as a personal hero for me. And you've been this true north, I think, for a lot of people. And it's so deeply, deeply appreciated. So just to have this little corner of your time for us is such a joy. So thank you.
It's my pleasure to be with you, Ms. Robertson, and thank you for doing this. It's very important.
Golly, you're really like my personal hero right now.
That was thorough. And when somebody else was finally introduced into the conversation, into the circle of closely held advisors of the president, Scott Atlas I'm talking about, then you had Fredo Cuomo, who I know is trying to reinvent himself on News Nation as some sort of centrist. But he isn't. Fredo Cuomo going after Scott Atlas, introduced way later than he should have been. And, of course, when Fredo announced that he had gotten COVID, as we find out from the diaries, Tony Fauci was, calling him, and they were speaking on a daily basis, reading him bedtime stories, checking on his temperature, I'm sure, perhaps anally. And thus, Cuomo was ready to go to attack anybody Fauci wanted attacked.
Dr. Atlas, okay, a guy with no pandemic experience. He literally would know more if he stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night. He's saying, hey, you in Michigan, these measures to help try to control the spread, fight back. Are you kidding me? Shame on you. What kind of doctor would tell people to rise up and resist the only kind of prophylaxis that can help them? What the hell is the matter with this person? Rise up. You rise up and do your job or get the hell out. How could you give this kind of advice? Of course, Fauci was being measured. He says, I don't agree with his position. This isn't Fauci's fight. The science is obvious. This is about Trump and the Trumpers. He's going to have his main health guy stand up and say, fight back against the regulations to keep you safe. Listen to him. I'm not making it up.
And this kind of isolation is one of the unspoken tragedies of the elderly, who are now being told, don't see your family at Thanksgiving. For many people, this is their final Thanksgiving, believe it or not. What are we doing here?
What the hell are you doing here? Yeah, it could be their last Thanksgiving. If you expose them to people who aren't wearing masks, who aren't socially distancing, and haven't been doing so, and haven't gotten tested, because they somehow think they don't want to get in on the con of COVID.
Yeah, and at the same time that Fredo was ranting and raving on CNN, his comrade over there, Jake Tapper, was having dinners with Tony Fauci at his home, we found out. And will there be a mea culpa from Fredo or Tapper or Dana Bash or any of the other hero worshipers in the D.C. press corps? I wouldn't count on it, which is why the public humiliation, something akin to a walk of atonement, is what I am spoiling for today. For more on all this, please be joined by one of the more level-headed and important thought leaders during COVID, talking about Jeffrey Tucker, founder and president of the Brownstone Institute, senior economics columnist for the Epoch Times as well. We've had Jeffrey on for years now throughout this, and he's been a valuable resource. Jeffrey, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So what do you hope for today?
I'm not really expecting him to say much at all other than have a really intense case of amnesia. I think we are going to get a few more drops at the opening of the hearing. We're going to hear Rand's got a few more data points he wants to release, and but the humiliation is already done. Fauci is toast. His reputation is toast. But more importantly, everybody has celebrated him. Talk about the media and Hollywood and government officials and all the celebrity culture surrounding him is all just in tatters now. His fame has turned to shame, and nobody's going to be able to stop that. These diaries are a devastating document. You said at the beginning that they are not private diaries; they're a product of the NIH, and that is certainly true. My read on them, and by the way, anybody who's reporting on these things, I don't believe they've read them, because I am now on day 4 of reading them, and I still have, I think, another 100, 150 pages to go, but maybe I'm just reading them very carefully. But they're voluminous. What this was Fauci's first draft of his autobiography.
Right.
He was valorizing himself, but this is not just a private man and his private thoughts. He had a full staff working on this document. So he had somebody there to put at the day, what the number of cases are, what the number of deaths, to screenshot the COVID project from the Atlantic, the latest data, to list all of his media appearances with incredible precision. So I'm just looking at it. I would say there may have been, if you include the number of people that are involved in screening his media appearances and setting them up and that sort of thing. So you got to figure there's probably 2 or 3 people involved in that at minimum. But I think there are probably 4 or 5 employees from NIAID involved in the writing of this document. So in total, we're talking about 10, 12 people who did nothing but serve as sort of courtiers to the great man to burnish his brand. There's a couple of things I want to say to help people understand what's going on here. One is that this burnishment of his brand, it was all misdirection, because he was, that's my interpretation, is that he was afraid of being found out for his role in funding the gain of function research that created a global pandemic. He never wanted the news about COVID to come out. And once it did, he panicked and commissioned a paper claiming that it was the spillover, not a natural spillover. And all the rest of everything he did was designed as a kind of cover-up. I mean, it's the oldest rule in public relations that if there's something bad about you that's going to come out, that's in the background, you want to gather around you as many fans as possible, and that's what he did. But now here's the other part that I wanted to mention that for people need to understand. The reason he was famous and loved, and there were cupcakes and bobbleheads and all this stuff, the reason for this was not because he's a great man. He's glib, and he's good on media. He does as many as 8 to sometimes 12 and sometimes more media appearances a day. Instead of reading the science, instead of talking to actual specialists and people, he did nothing but media the entire time. The reason why he was so loved, and this is obvious once I say it, but people don't actually say it, is that he set himself up to be the foil to Trump.
Yeah,
so if you don't so that's very obvious to say it, but it still has to be said that this is the reason for his fame and his love and the deliberate creation of this sort of personality cult around this guy was because they all knew that he was the foil to Trump. Now, how did they know that? It's because he talked to all of them off record and said Trump's a jerk, Trump's scary, Trump is Hitler. He says this in the diary that he's Hitler, and so they all knew that was his view. We had a little game going on with the national media. You understand what I mean? It was a little game of footsie under the table that he was playing with these people, and they played along. So they're just as culpable. So they all knew that his idea was that he was tricking Trump into destroying his own economy, to making some really bad decisions in the last year of his first term, and with the help of mail-in ballots, would help in overthrowing Trump. And he that was the idea. Media knew that, so they manufactured a fake.
Well, that's what right. He was Trump was Bane and he's Batman. I mean, this was here's the hero, here's the foil, and you see this early on in what was released, because in April of 2020. You have an account from Fauci, in his own words, of Deborah Birx getting excoriated by Trump. You're destroying the economy with the proposed lockdowns and so on and so forth.
You lied to me. You betrayed me.
Yes.
I never should have listened to you.
Right. And then Fauci said to Birx, "Don't worry, the people will love us."
That's exactly what happened, and I feel really bad. Trump was kind of trapped in a number of directions. The more popular he became, the more difficult it became for Trump to not to listen to him, and he should have fired him right away. But he was a little nervous too, because he was in political trouble. So this is a kind of a brilliant scheme that Fauci had going. But the incredible thing about this is this is not like the media was not being tricked. That's not
right.
This is all,
any more than they were tricked by Biden's mental acuity, the decline in mental acuity.
No, they were all playing along with a big theatrical thing they're putting on for us and treating us like we're all idiots. So we're supposed to, and every day, every hour, for years, we heard of what a genius this guy is, especially in the first year or two. And they knew it wasn't true. They knew that he wasn't following the science. I mean, they knew that he was just nothing other than a media performer. And by the way, you know that he was never really in charge of anything. He was one member of many on the coronavirus task force, right? That was it. He was nothing, but he hogged the spotlight.
Well, that was his
That's
out.
all he was.
That's his out, though, because every time you say, "Well, why did we do this? Why do this?" Oh, hey, all I do is do recommendations. I didn't, the fact that he was the most vociferous and the dominating face of all of these policies, vociferous proselytizer and dominating face. Whoa! I'm Pontius Pilate over here.
Well,
it wasn't my call to do social distancing or masks or vax mandates or lockdowns.
And that is also belied by the text of the diaries, because you have many occasions where he's calling up Bill de Blasio, shut the bars, shut the restaurants, shut the bars, shut the restaurants. That's his number one theme. He hates bars and restaurants. I don't know what this guy's problem is with bars and restaurants. Except
the ones that he goes to when they applaud him as he enters. Speaking of restaurants, this passage is interesting to another dynamic in the diaries. November 17th of 2021, I was nervous all night about having gotten infected in the very crowded restaurant, despite the fact that vaccination proof was required to get in. I'm well aware many people who are vaccinated are still getting infected, and that worried me a lot. So the disconnect, it's one thing to have emails that he can't necessarily control, but the passages he could have, he is saying something, in his diaries, in as you say, documentation for his forthcoming autobiography, very different than he was saying publicly at the time. And to allow himself to have that exposure of a written record that conflicts his public statements is sociopathic to me, or incompetent.
But it's even worse. You quoted something from November. If you go back to January 19th, 2021. Now, remember, if you're going to go back in those days, this is what the initial rollout. Most Americans did not have access to the shots. Everybody was anticipating them, thinking that they were some sort of magic cure for a respiratory infection, which they were not and could never be. On January 19th, 2021, he gets a note from a UK virologist who says, I've got bad news for you. The shot is reducing in its effectiveness by 2 and 3, 4 and 5 times in light of the new variant, right? And in light of the mutation, which at that time was Delta. And Fauci reports this. He says over the next 2 or 3 days, he says, I'm beginning to realize that this Delta mutation begins to dominate. These shots will be useless. Okay, so this is in the third week of January of 21. Most people that did not have anything quite close to access to these things. Fauci is already saying the mutations are making the shot useless, and he was even warned in these days that the more you vaccinate against a deprecated mutation, the more vulnerable your immune system will be to actually getting infected. My point is this, he knew this already in January of 2021. We know this because he said it repeatedly, and he even used the word useless in speaking about this shot. But that did not deter him. He was still on with his agenda to get 90% of the population vaccinated. The cities are segregated, millions faced mandates, millions of people lost their jobs, and millions of people were, quite frankly, harmed. He was harmed himself. We only found out that he had a major heart issue.
The shot. Pulmonary infarction, which he also didn't disclose. Yeah. Right. I mean, look, it's a story that's as old as Sophocles. Pride goeth before the fall. It's just his fall isn't going to be as hard as it should be.
And same goes before the shame. I mean, but the level of malice is actually beyond what even I had expected. This is far worse than I really expected.
Jeffrey Tucker, we gotta go, but I appreciate your time as always. Founder and president of the Brownstone Institute, senior economics columnist for the Epoch Times. Jeffrey Tucker, thank you.
My pleasure.
And he joined us on the alfwealthgroup.com. Coming up at 7:07, we're going to talk to Kenneth Pollack about the state of play in the Middle East. It's now 7 o'clock on AM 560 WIND Chicago.
COVID